As we introduced you to this WJ in our last video, we noted that it had several electrical gremlins. Specifically, no turn signals, no speedometer, no HVAC power, and lights on for brake and ABS, SRS, etc. On this video, we bring you along for the diagnosis. Now, as we get started, I must warn you, you'll see us get stuck on bad data. And that's a lesson here. The lesson here is to follow proper diagnosis. Don't get too hung up on hunting that quick fix. I mean, sure, look for that stuff, and if it's present, that's great. But know when to switch to diagnosis. Mouse remnants and prior shop parts cannon, well, that distracted me a little bit too long, as you'll see. All right, so let's take a look under here again. Now, I had made mention that up in there, and it's pretty far up there. Let's see if we can see it. You see that long one right there? That is the flasher unit that I was concerned about, and that's the one we put in there that's good, and well, it didn't solve any of our problems. And there's actually a turn signal unit here, which I have one I pulled out, and we'll do a video on this and show you. We'll do a separate video, but this can be a culprit for a lot of issues. If you lose your turn signals, and I think you might even lose a gauge or two. I really can't remember. This was many years ago it happened, but it was actually bad solder joints in this that would crack, and this piece would stop functioning. And instead of ordering a new one, all you got to do is pop this thing out, take this piece off, resolder the joints, put it back in, and you're good to go, and it'll never break again. So essentially, kind of getting an idea and remembering some of how these WJs are put together, minus of course the fact that I have no idea why it has a seatbelt on the center console. But so that probably made it past like some test. I'll bet you they did a crash test and like some panel flew off and like impaled the test drive dummy. And they said, well, let's just put a strap of seatbelt material here to hold it in. I don't know. You tell me. Until someone tells me something more, that's what I'm going with. All right, but in all seriousness, we have some wiring here. We've got the OBD connector. Well, that's a good place to start. Let me grab my scan tool and let's show you what we're getting, and then we'll show you what we're going to check next. We're going to use the old laptop. Of course, we can't use Forescan because this is a Jeep, but we can go ahead and use OBD Wiz. Let's plug in this into our connector, and it has lit up. All right. Turn to run and connect. Sure. All right, so we got a powertrain pending, vehicle speed sensor A. That's it. So there's a couple of things it'll pick up here. ECU 18. Wow, it's almost like it can't read everything. Let's go to diagnostics here. Same PID. So we're getting less on here. Let me go ahead and grab my other scanner, because quite frankly, I'm seeing less on this computer than I'm seeing on the other scan tool. So unless I'm doing something wrong, which is entirely possible because I'm kind of dumb. But I wasn't dumb here. Well, unless you count the fact that I knew very well many WJ computer functions are hard to access without the old DRB3 tool. But even still, this software wasn't reading as many modules as others can. Now, my other scan tool did a better job, allowing me to read more codes off the ABS and SRS modules. So there's vehicle speed sensor A, so we do have a pending code for that. By the way, I also used off-camera WJ Diag, a cool app that provides some good detail. WJ Grand Cherokee, auto scan, let's see. So what scan tools have you used outside of the DRB3 or DRB3 emulation / YTech that did a good job reading WJ data for you? Let us know in the comments. Ooh, yeah, here's where I was seeing a bunch of stuff. Loss of ignition, run only, P1200. And that just a ton of those. So in reality here, the scanner was actually giving us the answer, but we were a little too blind to see it. We were so focused on the other prior shop's efforts and all the massive amounts of mouse droppings, not to mention my past experiences with mice basically eating WJ wires, I was so stuck on this being a rodent issue.
So I started to dig into the wiring. Something was causing multiple circuits to fail, and my first thought was perhaps, well, something in the bulkhead connectors, and their wiring maybe could lead me to a fault.
So looking at WJs and how the wiring is set up, one thing that I really want to check is in the kick panel here, which I think it just pops off with this right here. Yeah. And then pull our floor piece up, and we should be able to pull this thing off. Pop the hood while we're at it. So if you're looking to remove the kick panel piece here, you pull up the floor piece, and you got a couple of screws here. And I could probably change my battery out. So let me go ahead and remove this so we can get a good visibility, and we'll come back. Okay, so let's take a look at what we see on this, which is, this is kind of your main bulkhead wire where everything passes through. So there's a lot of things that pass through to go up to your dash and corresponding spots. So since we're not seeing any obvious wiring issues up there, what I'm hoping is that maybe there's something with this that is worth a check. But again, just a bit of a crapshoot there. Now there's a whole nother one missing here, and well, look at this. It's a cigarette wrapper, it looks like. This is probably from when it was built, honestly. What do you want to bet? You think that's when it was built? Someone had the smokes going and they dropped their smokes in there? But anyway, maybe it was also when this was installed, who knows, but I don't really know. So, okay, there's some zip ties here. I don't know if you can see those. Gimbal, come on now. Zip ties holding, this gimbal sucks. Zip ties holding that thing up. So that could be something. I think what I'd like to do is take this connector off. Well, we should probably pull the battery out, or at least disconnect the battery temporarily. We'll pull this out. I want to just check out everything on it. I also want to look up into the wiring up here where I can see. The good news is I'm not seeing any obviously bad wiring, which is also kind of the bad news, because you'd think if you just saw some bad wiring, well, you'd call it and know what it was. And we're going to come in here and see if we can get around this and get to that. Looks like a 10 millimeter.
Now, if you can't already tell, it was late after work on a midweek evening, and I was really just hoping to find that quick fix. So that's kind of where the first part of this video is going to lead us through.
Okay, so far, I mean, it looks all right. It kind of gets you a little view of it.
And sometimes simply reseating this bulkhead connector can solve issues, especially if you know or think someone's been here before, or if you're concerned about any corrosion on the contacts. In our case, this was not the issue, so on to the next thing. Now, each minute I spend chasing ghosts here rather than spending an hour studying the wiring diagrams and diagnosis steps. Well, this is going to be time that I wish I could get back.
All right, well, that was worth a shot, but it didn't seem to do it. So we can also check our door wiring, though we don't seem to have the classic issue that you would have with this. We all know that, right? Ground wire missing here. Yeah, that could certainly be a problem for some things, but I don't think it's necessarily a problem for what we're seeing.
We did check out the door wiring. The common broken wires wasn't present, and certainly not the cause here.
I haven't found a smoking gun just yet, but I am really kind of focused on this bulkhead wiring and the wiring surrounding it, because I do know from looking at things that this does control a lot of the functions that we seem to be getting error lights on. So let's take another look. I'll bring you back with any updates that I find.
I was still stuck on rodent damaged wiring rather than proper diagnosis.
So as you might be able to see, I've just taken things off more and more over there. I ended up taking that wiring bulkhead piece out, inspecting both sides of it, and well, I don't really see any damage to the wires in the bulkhead. And well, I decided to check this one, and let me just try to show you what I'm seeing. All right, so I pulled this one out, and there was some pieces of stuff on it. Look at that. So that's mouse nest of something. And you can see on the wire here, there's some remnants of stuff stuck to it. Now, I don't see any eaten wires on this side. I haven't pulled this out yet. These are kind of a pain to get out. There's a second bulkhead connector there. So let's take that one out and just take a quick peek. Everything looks generally okay. So I think I'm going to go ahead and plug it back in for the time being. But these are important things to check if they were loose or taken off for any reason. I, of all things, don't know how to remove the glove box, but I know how to open it. And looky there, there's our mouse nest. So, assuming it just popped the sides like any other glove box, but so at any rate, I'm going to get this off and I'm going to pull this side panel off. We're going to take a look at the wiring. All right, so went ahead and pulled out the glove box. There was two little retainers on the top. Pop those out and then pop the three things out and remove the whole thing. And well, as you can kind of see here as I go up and look in, there's really no wiring to be seen here. It's really all just the HVAC box. So, but I did find more remnants of mouse nest also behind this panel. As you can see, there was a lot of seeds. And this goes back to the whole thing of, I'd really like to clean this thing out completely. You know, just make sure there's no trace of mouse. Obviously we had mice on this side causing trouble with the seat belt. Looks like they ate the seat belt and made their nest in there. But other than that, there's nothing else jumping out at me here. There's a little bit of wetness under this carpet here, so again, reason to pull this out.
Wait, did I really wonder where that water came from? Let's look from just a little bit earlier. And yes, we did power wash the door jambs carefully. And no, it wasn't one of those videos you see online where someone power washes their dashboard.
So anyway, in terms of what I'm going to check next, I haven't thought about that yet. I'm going to do a little more research into the wiring because obviously we have the bulkheads here and I need to understand what these bulkheads control. Everything I understand, even though like I'm seeing mouse remnants here, at least this is where they were living, that doesn't mean they weren't, you know, living in their apartment here and doing work over there. Well, the bulkhead on the driver's side is the one that I believe probably controls the instrument panel stuff that we're seeing, but I could be wrong, and I'm certainly wrong a lot, and something to check. But that is, of course, where we have, I don't know if that's the PCM, it's probably the body control module, because then under the hood, this is really testing my WJ knowledge. I believe this is your TCM here, and then this underneath all this mess, it's a little hard to see, is your PCM, which is back behind here, or at least some bulkhead connectors. So I have removed all this before to look at a wiring harness here because there was a break in a vacuum line, I believe, on one of the WJs. So you got to like take all this crap out, and it's kind of a pain, but it's not that bad. You can get to it. But anyway, you got your TCM and all that. And well, since the car drives fine, it doesn't have any codes from that. I'm really focused on the body control module, the ABS module itself, which if I recall, the ABS modules are integrated into the unit here, and they can certainly have their own issues, but the wiring to it looks fine. So that's possible, but I have a suspicion that what we're seeing here are remnants of issues that exist in here from our data link to that. Now I did pull this off. I didn't show it on camera, but the wire looked fine. I didn't test it yet because I'm just poking around right now. But I am a firm believer that part of our issues are going to be on this side of the car. But I think at this stage, I'm going to do a little more research, and then I'm going to have to pull more stuff apart. And I'd like to be able to see some of the wiring up in the dash and examine a little closer, and maybe just might have to do some pin testing on this too. Now, some things I haven't done. Look, this thing went in with the HVAC non-operational and a few other issues. From what I understand, all the issues that are present with it now existed prior, and the shop swapped out this fuse block, and I guess that's the BCM, but I'm gonna have to look that up and confirm it. And well, it didn't solve anything. But what I don't know for certain, is that true, or did it cause more issues? By putting this unit in, did it, cause some sort of a CAN bus problem? Or could there be a CAN bus problem from other wiring issues somewhere in the car? And that could be as simple as what we're seeing. We could have a CAN bus fault. So I'm going to look into a few things, but I think that what I was really hopeful for today and didn't pan out was that we would just find a bad wire, a loose connection, something simple, something obvious that we could look at in 5 minutes and go, here's our culprit.
So this was another driver to our method, the hope for a quick fix. Between that, assuming rodent damage, and going off another shop's work, I continued to bypass proper diagnostics. Learn from this. You could see that I was starting to come around, though. The realization that I didn't know what worked and what didn't before and after the last shop's work. But of course, then I started talking CAN bus issues and, probably overcomplicating things. I'd start getting closer once I sat down with the wiring diagrams. Yeah, that sucks, but it really does help. All right, so sometimes when you're troubleshooting an issue, there's kind of, two paths you can go down, although you should be troubleshooting, which means you should be trying to think through the problem and attacking it logically. But there are two general ways you can do that. Number one, you can do what we've done and start pulling things apart, looking for an obvious problem. If that doesn't work, you can also sit and think and do a little research. And that's kind of the stage that we're at now. So my hope was, with evidence of rodent infestation and a mouse nest in the glove box, that we could pull a few panels off, we could check some of the main bulkhead connectors, and we could find damaged wiring fairly easily and solve all the problems and be done. Unfortunately, it didn't seem to be the case. We've checked a lot of things. We've checked all of our kick panel locations. We've checked the main area on our fuse panel and body control module in here. And we've even taken the glove box out and tried to look at some of the wiring over there. So since that didn't work out, I spent some time in the factory service manual poring over the wiring details, diagrams, and locations for components. So a couple things that come into play was, number one, I was correct, which is good because I sometimes forget my WJs, that this, of course, is the body control module under here. We pointed at the transmission control module and PCM under the hood. But then one thing to remember is, as far as I know, the ABS module is mounted on the pump, and the airbag control module is mounted under the center console. So that leads me to some things that I found. So the biggest thing that I'm looking at here was the hope and desire that all of the issues we're seeing are tied to a single problem. But it's also possible that all the issues we're seeing are tied to their own individual issues. So a good example, our instrument panel seems to work. We have lights, backlighting, the gauges seem to all function, but the speedometer apparently doesn't work. Well, we do get a code for a speed sensor A being a problem. So that could be the speed sensors on the transmission, one of which the PCM uses to pull data for speed sensing for the speedometer. So if we don't have a speedometer working and we're getting that code that's not specifying a specific wheel sensor, it could be our speed output sensor. So I did some research in the service manual, and I can't tell directly, there's so much you can read in there. I don't know if the ABS module relies on that speed sensor data, but I would assume that it does, because it has to compare the speed at which the rest of the vehicle is going versus the speed at which each individual wheel is going to determine if you've got a locked up wheel. So that's promising. So that's a relatively inexpensive part, and we can get underneath and check the wiring. So that's potential. But outside of that, a lot of the other components, what I tried to do in the wiring diagram was look for similarities and see, again, is there a grouping of things? Is there one thing? Is it everything is separate? So we talked about the speedometer not working and a potential there. Well, let's say we also have an airbag light on and our multi-function switch doesn't work. So I did look into how the clock spring functions, and I don't think it's the clock spring, but we can test that today by making sure that the horn works, because you know what? I didn't do that. So the horn and the buttons on the steering wheel should all function if the clock spring is good. Anything below it, like the multi-function switch, probably wouldn't be clock spring related. Though one thing that's important to look at is how all the grounds function. Do they share a ground? If you lose your clock spring, does that interrupt the ground circuit or anything like that that would ruin things like on the steering column? So that led me to digging into the ground locations on the vehicle and how each bits of the circuitry kind of function. So one thing that comes into play is if you lose your door ground, which is a common thing, have the wire break in here, and visually they looked fine, but sometimes they can break internally, and the best way to know for sure is to ohm test all the wires. So we didn't do that yet, but I looked in the book, and honestly, the things that are tied, the circuits that are tied into the door module, which is part of what's in here, are really tied to other things that are already working. So we have our dome lights working. We don't have a draw on the system that often happens when these break. Other things are working that are related to the door. So I honestly don't believe the doors or door modules are a problem. What I did find, however, was the AZC, I think it's the auto zone control or whatever it is. It's the HVAC unit, the automatic HVAC unit. That ties in and has a circuit shared with, I believe, the ABS or the airbag module. We do have an airbag light on. And also, what else isn't working? Our multi-function switch, I believe, might have had a tie-in to one of the grounds. I think it was ground 200, G200. And looking in the book, G200 is located underneath our center console where our airbag module is. Now that also corresponds, that wiring would run down on the right side of the console on a left-hand drive vehicle. And the service manual, by the way, has all these images, everything you need to dig in. You just got to sit and do the research. So I'm hoping maybe we have a ground that is damaged, because we did see acorn shells and things like that, evidence that there was rodents on the front end of that right-hand side of the console. So if they chewed through one wire, damaged the ground, that could affect multiple circuits and could, in fact, be some of what we're seeing. Now, if that doesn't turn out to be the case, we're going to have to go back. I saved a whole bunch of stuff out of the bookmarked a ton of things in the service manual. We're going to have to go component by component and troubleshoot. I'm trying to go methodically and look at things, so I'm going to focus on grounds next. And we're going to also use the opportunity to pull these components out and inspect wiring along the way. So the main grounds, again, that I'm going to check out, the very first one that I believe is maybe tied to a number of things is going to be G200, but there's also I think 201, which is also under there as well. So there's two grounds in the center console that we can check. I'm going to go ahead and pull the center console out. It's pretty simple. You can follow the service manual. This video is not about tearing things apart. This video is about solving an electrical gremlin. So that's what we're going to focus on. So I'm just going to get my butt to work here. If you hadn't already noticed, the interior to this WJ was pretty dirty, and it had tons of remnants from the mice. Pulling panels and interior components was something I needed to do anyway as part of a deep cleaning. So all this kind of had a secondary purpose, making the interior like new again. All right, so we got the center console out. It was easy. Just a number of screws. Take off the front cover. There's a couple of screws under the cup holders. And then there's some underneath the bucket, whatever you call the main contraption that holds things. But as you can see here, you wonder, hey, why'd you pull it out? Couldn't you just look inside? And sure enough, when you pull this back piece out, you can kind of see up in here. But again, look at all the stuff in here just from age. And look, mouse remnants. And it's amazing what's fallen into the center console. The Jack Links, I know that very well. A connoisseur, no doubt. And but it's funny how much paperwork there is that's fallen into here. So pens, things of that nature. So this is good because this is going to let me deep dive into this wiring and really check it out. And I got to find where that ground goes. Looks like one of the grounds is right here. I think that's 201 though. I don't think that's the ground that I'm specifically looking for. I'll need to recheck the diagrams and locations. And there's also a plate back here we could pull off. And like I said, so this is going to gain me a couple things. Obviously now I can really inspect this wiring here, but I can also
get the shop vac in here and clean this out. And that's good because, well, we got to clean this side out as well. So let me pick up anything that I find. All right, and yes, you are correct. I have vacuumed and sprayed the carpets, so that way I'm not going to be laying in mouse poop anymore. Did that side as well, and again, a little preview that shows this thing could clean up really well. So, all right, I missed a spot, but that's okay. Have a little clearer view here. I'm going to go ahead and pull this back panel off, do a little more investigation, and well, I just wanted to show you how clean it was now. All right, we're back, and we've done a lot of cleanup, and as you can see here, we've got one of the wiring harnesses disconnected. Let's show you what we found. I haven't found the smoking gun yet, but I have found a few things that I find interesting. So there are two main harnesses that come in. There's the harness that comes down this side of the center console. As you can see, it has push pins and secures it along where the shifter goes. And that comes back here where it connects to the shifter assembly, which we've disconnected. Also to the connector B of your ABS module.
I keep calling this the ABS module because my brain doesn't work. I know, and you know, it's the airbag or SRS module.
Here is our ABS module. Gone ahead and pulled it out, which let me see the mounting. Now, on the mounting, well, all right, so anyway, hang on, I'm jumping ahead. You've got a smaller piece of the wiring harness that comes around over top and connects to your parking brake lever. You also have this, I think this is the ground 201, I believe it is, and that ground goes to this stud back here. You also have this main ground. This is that ground 200, and as you can see, it has multiple wires, controls a lot of different things. You also have on this side of your airbag a wiring harness that comes down in here, and I thought maybe that was the ground at first, so I was kind of tugging on a little bit. Well, don't tug on it too hard. You can see in there, well, maybe you can't, but I can. There's some twisted pairs. So this is probably bus wiring twisted pair stuff here is my guess, without taking another look at the wiring diagrams, because, well, it's over there and I'm here. And anyway, that's where you have connector A as well, which also routes here. Now this vehicle does have side impact airbags. It has the side curtain airbags. See up there? It's got an SRS logo. So this probably goes to some sensors on the side of the car, since this one's optioned out that way. None of the other WJs I have had the side curtain airbags. So this is a unique one and something to consider when you're working on it. Of course, we do have our battery disconnected. Okay, so here's what I'm finding interesting. So this ground that goes back here, try to get a view of that. Okay, and probably not the best view, but this basically went in here, and then it would press its way in with this kind of locking ring sort of type as it bolted down, and it would gouge its way in past the paint. But as you can see here, there really isn't a whole heck of a lot of grounding surface, and it's kind of wide here. Now granted, it'll touch the nut, which then touches the stud, so it does ground, so it's all right. But I would, since I'm here, probably going to take some of that coating off. Now much the same on this one. Now I can get this largely out of the way. Let's look at this one, and hopefully that's going to be somewhat in focus for you. As you can see here, the whole stud is dirty. There's only a few clean spots of metal there. So considering this ground runs so many things, I really wish that it looked better. So we can check that out. Now, as for the ground strap itself, not too bad. It's not like overly corroded. I think this was the top side, so it's a little corroded on the top side, but it looks like we have connections. Everything's still crimped, nothing's torn. And well, I can go along our harness here and check the wiring as well, but I think the easiest thing to do, again, trying to go easiest first, is I'm going to clean up these grounds. I'm going to get some bare fresh metal on here, bolt those back in, and we'll see if we have any changes. Otherwise, it's going to be a matter of going through this harness, cutting the conduit off, and tapping into some wires and looking for signals and things like that. But I don't expect to find anything because, well, you know, the wires that I can see are fine and none of this insulation has been chewed up.
We cleaned the grounds, checked the wiring, and reinstalled. As things looked okay here, we didn't expect it to fix things, and well, no surprise, it didn't. The grounds were okay, but at least now both grounds and the Jeep were a bit cleaner. Looks like we're going to need to dig into the components and start probing wiring to find out where we're losing voltage or ground in the circuits. The whole mouse ate it voice was finally getting silenced, allowing me to focus on better diagnosis.
All right, so I've gone ahead and put our ABS module back, or our airbag module back in. Got our grounds hooked up, and got it in park. Hooked our battery back up, and we're just going to see if we get anything different. And all of those lights are still on. Airbag light's still on. Horn. Okay, so that's working. Cruise. Well, the engine's not running. I think it might have to be running, but I don't see any life on this thing yet. So what's interesting is the rear defroster, you can hear the relay click. Listen. So cruise works, but all the same lights are still on. We have gauges. So we didn't really fix anything yet. We found a ground that wasn't perfect, but that's okay. But we basically now confirmed that everything here is okay. I think what I'd like to do next is do some component level stuff. All right, let's go ahead and pull the battery. And this was a good exercise, and we cleaned a ton of things up. And this was actually super easy. I mean, we had the console out in about 5 minutes, so it's super easy to remove. I know it looks drastic, but it was really simple. And it gives us the opportunity to fix some of this stuff while we're at it down here and clean it up. So let's go ahead and get some of this stuff pulled out, see what we got, and let's continue on our hunt and try to find what we're looking for. All right, so we're checking pinouts on our automatic climate control, and as you can see, we've pulled it out, and well, no obvious signs of damage. I've pulled some wire back and everything's looking okay. So we do have our power probe hooked up, and we're going to check a few wires here. We've got a ground on here. See that black wire? That's pin number 8. So I'm going to try to set this where I can test it and you can see it. All right, so that's a good ground. And I have the key on, by the way. This one right here, pin number 12, is fused battery plus. Okay. And then the one next to it is a run battery. We're only getting 0.5 volts on that one. So that's interesting. So I'd like to look at that and see. That would be this, I think that's white and pink, but maybe it's pink and red. Some of these wire colors, not super good at looking at wire colors.
So now we're doing some proper diagnostics, reviewing wiring diagrams and even service manual diagnosis guides. The puzzle sure gets easier when you follow the right path.
All right, so I'm thinking we might be making some progress. We're going to test something. We've got the battery connected again. I've once again got my power probe connected, and I found this, which I'll save off and show on the video, but this is a troubleshooting step, and one of the things that it confirmed was on the on step 3 here, it says measure the voltage of the fused ignition switch output circuit. Is the voltage above 10 volts? If yes, go to 4. If no, repair that. Now, if you remember, that's the one we measured 0.5 volts on, so that must be our problem. Item 2, we had more than 10. We had 12 volts at the fused B+. So what I'm going to do, I've reconnected it, and I've got a back probe wire going into terminal 11 on the connector. I'll try to show the pinouts on the video. I'm saving a lot of this stuff on the computer. So what I'm going to do, I've got the key already on,
And as you can see here, there's nothing on the display. So I'm going to send power. We know we have power going on the, hang on, my wires are everywhere. Okay, so we know we have power going in pin number 12, but we know we only have 0.5 volts on pin 11. So I'm going to put my power probe in here, and I'm going to go ahead and send some power. Look at that! We have life. And it is working and blowing air. Oh, our ABS light went out. Our airbag light went out. Our brake light's on because I have the parking brake up. So hang on. Now if I take that off, let's give it a second. Airbag light, ABS light. All right, let's put our handbrake down. We have found our problem. Oh, I'm excited. All right, so power probe. All the lights are off. Let me turn the blinker off. All right, so we're sending power. All of our lights are off. So our issue appears to be this line, and that goes to, I think, fuse 20 on the main fuse panel there. So we can test for power at the fuse, and we'll know if we have a break in the line between the fuse and here or somewhere else. So we are now inching closer to finding the problem, and this one little thing right here has solved all of these issues. All right, so continuing our troubleshooting, we've got fuse 20 right here. I've already checked the fuse, it's a 10 amp, and well, the fuse is good as expected. We have our module right there. So what I'm going to do, just to validate if we have power, these fuses have little metal pins that you can access. You don't have to pull it out. As you can see, we're not getting any power here. Now if I go ahead and connect to the fuse, and I'm going to hit the button, there we go. So back to the wiring diagrams to figure out what powers this fuse, where the wire comes from, and see if we can figure out if we have a break in the wiring or something else. But yeah. All right, so we are back after doing some reading in our wiring diagrams, and well, I'll tell you what we found. Did some research, and essentially what I've come to the conclusion of is I'm pretty confident from the test we did the last time that we have a good wire from our fuse 20 to our AZC. But I also found that on the other side of it, it ends up going through the junction box. It also ties in with the body control module, but it ends up going to a black and orange wire that comes up to the ignition switch, which is right here. And the connector's in the back. We'll show you that in a second. Now, I also found in the wiring diagrams, there are two other fuses, and if I get these wrong, I'll dub over, but it's fuse 19 and I believe fuse 30 that also are fed from the black and orange wire. Now, when I looked at the circuits that are involved in all these, but it is essentially all the things that I know to not be working, such as the AZC, the flasher unit. We don't have turn signals. One of these does, I think this one does the airbag module. This one does the ABS module. So one thing I can do is with the key to run, which it currently is, I've back probed pin number 3, which I'll take the connector out and show you, which is the black and orange wire. And got my multimeter set here. And all I need to do, I'm going to go ahead and ground this, and nothing. So we are not getting power out of the ignition switch on this position. Now, based on how the ignition runs, I do believe, and I'll check the other sides, but I do believe we're getting power to the ignition switch, but no power out of it. So I actually believe what may be the problem is our ignition switch. All the wire pulls, all the digging that I'm doing, the panels I've removed, it may be the ignition switch itself. And take a look at the ignition switch. Look at how grungy it looks. So it's interesting. I would have thought that
if the run position wasn't working on the ignition switch, then how could the PCM, the TCM, the rest of the functions of the vehicle operate? Well, if you look at the wiring, there's multiple outputs on this, and only this output or position number 2 is the one that runs through the black and orange wire that powers only 3 fuses, which are all of the circuits that were having problems. Now, when I backfed that circuit, putting power to our ACZ, it backfed the circuit, applied power to it, and we were good to go. So my assumption at this point is that we have a fault in our ignition switch, and that's what we're going to check out next. Now, one thing you got to be really careful of when you're working on this stuff, and I've not been sitting in the chair looking at the steering wheel. If I was really nervous about it, I could go ahead and disconnect the airbag here. In fact, there we go. So one precaution, go ahead and take out your wires to your clock spring, and that's going to disconnect everything and also prevent the airbag from going off in your face while you're working. Let's go ahead and pull this connector out, and I'll show you there's actually 2 connectors, but the big one is the one that you want, and it's kind of a pain in the reach. There we go. As you can see here, we're back probing pin number 3. Pin number 3 is the top left as you're looking at the connector with the piece on the top. And this is all in the service manual. And there is our black and orange wire. And we've got our back probe touching right there. Now what I should be able to do is I'll look at the wiring, find out which one of these feeds power to the switch, and I'll back probe that. And if we have power coming in and we don't have power going out, then it's obviously our ignition switch that's the problem. But I'm 99% sure because, well, if we didn't have power coming to the switch in the first place, we wouldn't have the other positions of the switch working. We wouldn't have cranking. We wouldn't have it running. We wouldn't have power to the other circuitry run by the ignition switch itself. So I believe we found our problem, and it turned out to not be a mouse or wiring issue, even though there was evidence of rodents all over the place. We've got our battery still connected, and what we've done is we've back probed. There are 2 of the pins we want to check. So we're going to back probe pin number 2 and pin number 4, which is the red one. So number 2 is the top center, and number 4 is the bottom right. And we'll go ahead and ground out. And as you can see, 12.5. Let me move to the other one. Okay, we're on the other one, and 12.5 volts. So the 2 lines that should have power coming into the switch have power. The line exiting that runs the circuits that are failing on this vehicle doesn't have power. So to me, that concludes that the switch should be removed and either repaired or replaced.
As this video is already pretty long, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up here. This was the exploration of troubleshooting and finding the problem. It's also, as I've said, a good lesson to not get hung up on assumptions. Yes, there was tons of mice in this truck before, and yes, another shop had misfired the parts cannon. Well, once I focused on the data and the wiring diagrams and really mapped the circuits out in my head, the answer started to reveal itself pretty quickly. Now that we know it's the ignition switch in this video, we'll follow up this one with a part 2, and we'll go ahead and do a quick repair of that, show you what we did, and finally replace it with a new Mopar part. So do us a favor, like this video, comment your experiences or thoughts, and definitely subscribe to Vortex Garage for more WJ content.